Welcome back, everybody, to our season on the shofar and Rosh Hashanah eventually. In the last two episodes, Rabbi Fohrman took us on a bit of a trip. We had started with Rosh Hashanah and the shofar and then shifted to the blasting of the shofar at Sinai. Now, Rabbi Fohrman told us that in order to understand Sinai's shofar blast, we would have to investigate its origins at the beginning of the Exodus, all the way back at the burning bush. When we turned to the burning bush, we found that God was trying to communicate something nuanced to Moshe. He was trying to get Moshe to understand that he is the being with you God, that he hears the people's cries, he feels their pain, he's been there with them and will continue to be there with them. But we're not quite ready to move back to Sinai just yet, because uncovering this message is only half the story of the burning bush. Like, we literally stopped right in the middle of the burning bush narrative when we ended the last episode. So today, what we're going to do is read the rest of that story. We're going to pick up exactly where we left off. Now, where was that? God has given Moshe the grand vision of who he is, but now he's going to get into the weeds of his actual plan. His plan for Moshe. How he wants Moshe to go to Egypt, and what exactly he wants Moshe to tell the people. Now, what remains to be seen is how well Moshe will receive this message, this plan, and how well he will communicate its nuances to the people. And, actually, we'll have to start by investigating who he actually is supposed to be communicating this message to in the first place. Okay, I'm Imu Shalev, and this is Aleph Beta's A Book Like No Other, generously sponsored by Shari and Nathan Lindenbaum.
So, Imu, we're going to pick up right from this spot. We talked about how these themes of being with are there over and over and over again, how important it is for God to continually introduce himself in this kind of way. He's not just the God of action, not just the God who's going to take the people out of Egypt, but he's the God who really is empathetic, who's understood the people's plight. He wants Moshe to understand that. And we're about to see that he wants someone else to understand that too. And that brings us to verse 16 in chapter 3. The next thing that God says is, Lech va'asafta et ziknei Yisrael. Moses, I want you to spread what it is that I've told you to somebody else. It's the ziknei Yisrael. It's the elders of Israel. Go and gather them together. V'amarta lehem, I want you to tell them, Hashem, Yud He and Vav He, this being with you God, Elohei Avotechem, the God of their forefathers, that God, Nira Elai, showed up and revealed himself to you, to Moses. Elokei Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, the same God that was there for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he has a message. And that message is, Pakod pakadati etchem. I have come back to redeem you. That hasui lachem b'Mitzrayim, what was done to you in Egypt. I understand what was done to you in Egypt. And from that position of empathy, know that I've come to redeem you. This is what I want you to tell the elders of Israel. Now, it's a little bit unclear at this point why it's so important to gather the elders together. Do they have a function? Are they supposed to do something? And Imu, it's not like God says, I want you to gather the elders so that they will do X, Y, and Z. He's just like, I want you to gather the elders and tell them all that. So there is a little bit of ambiguity here, no?
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like what you're emphasizing at this moment is the character of the elders of Israel, which, like, I've always read as a synonym for the people of Israel, right? Like, the idea that Moshe is gathering the elders of Israel doesn't seem to be a major plot point. I don't remember it in the Ten Commandments. I don't remember it in Prince of Egypt.
It's a great point. It's like, do you even remember the elders at the burning bush? It's like, if I told you Family Feud style, name me the top 5 things that our survey says that stand out to you in the burning bush. It's like angel in the bush, right? Burning bush.
Take off
this
your
new
shoes.
Name. Sure. Like, that's what you remember from the burning bush. Nobody remembers that Moses was supposed to gather the elders. And the answer, really, because the elders don't even do anything. Like, the elders don't seem to have this starring role in the Exodus. The Exodus just seems to be a function of God, Moses, Pharaoh, and the people are just kind of hanging back and getting ready to be redeemed. And the elders,
I actually think that's a great point. It's a double obscurity, because you think of the Exodus as God, Moses, and Pharaoh, right? In your mind's eye, when Moshe leaves the burning bush, he heads straight to Pharaoh, bursts open the palace doors, and says, "Let my people go." You sort of forget that there's the Israelite dimension of things, And then on top of that, we're supposed to now know that, like, no, wasn't all the Israelites in the beginning. It was the elders first, and then it was the
Right.
Israelites. Like,
And that's not even like God says, I want you to gather all of Israel and tell them, here's the truth. Like, we understand that. If like Moses is on top of some rock with 600,000 people gathered together and reveals to them this truth, but instead it's just the elders. And it's not like have the elders tell the people. It's not even that. It's not like, I need an efficient way of distributing this message to all the people. Why don't you have the elders distribute this message? There's no sense of that here. It's just like tell the elders it's really important for them to know without really understanding why it's important. So let's put a little question mark on why this little asterisk is even here at all, and let's continue. Okay, so go and gather these elders, tell them that the being there, God, the being with you, God, has shown up, and tell them I'm going to take them out of Egypt and I'm going to bring them to the land of Canaan. And I want you to know, Moshe, verse 18, V'shamu l'kolecha, that they are going to listen to you. Ubata atav v'ziknei Israel, and you, along with these elders, are going to go to the king of Egypt. V'amartem elav, and you should say to him, Hashem Elokei Ivrim Nikra Aleinu, the Yud He and Vav He, the God of the Hebrews, has happened upon us. V'ata nelchana derech shloshet yamim b'midbar. Now, please, Pharaoh, can you let us go for 3 days in the desert? We want to celebrate. We want to offer offerings to Hashem Elokeinu, to Yud He and Vav He, our God. And I just want to point out, if I asked you who is supposed to go to the king of Egypt, right? Most people, having watched the Prince of Egypt, having watched the Ten Commandments, having even read the Exodus story, I think 9 out of 10 people would have said, who is supposed to go to Pharaoh and deliver the message that the Jews want their 3 days off? You would have said what?
Moshe and Aaron.
And yet, if you look carefully at the text here, that's actually not what it says here. It says, I want you, the Ziknei Israel, and these elders to go to the king of Egypt. The Amartem, plural, and you, plural, should say to him. In other words, it's not Moses delivering this fiat to Pharaoh. It's actually a group thing. It's you and the elders who are all going to say in unison, this is what we want to do. It was really interesting. Like, okay, so here's a role that's coming out for the elders. Like, they're supposed to go with you and they're supposed to join with you in making this appeal to Pharaoh. And then God says, Vania dati, but Moses, just so we're clear on this, I know, I know he's not going to let you go. Ultimately, he's going to have to be forced with a strong hand. And ultimately, that's what I'll do. I will stretch out my hand and I will smite Egypt with all of my wonders. And then they're going to let you go. And that's the game plan that God reveals to Moses at the burning bush.
In the last few months, our listenership for this show has doubled, something that obviously could never have happened without all of you. So to celebrate and say thank you, we want to give you a gift. We want to offer you an ebook written by Rabbi Fohrman on his all-time favorite text. You guessed it, the Garden of Eden. With the new Parsha cycle just around the corner, when we're all going to be diving back into the garden once again, hopefully this will make it really special for you this year. You've made the past year so special for us. There's a link in the description where you can let us know your email, and we'll send you the book. Enjoy, and please let us know what you think.
So let's take a look at Moshe's response to God. So that brings us to the first verse of the next chapter. Vayan Moshe, and Moshe answers God and says, V'hein lo ya'aminu li, v'lo yishmu b'koli. But they won't believe me. They won't listen to my voice. Who's they, would you say, Imu?
So again, when I first read those words, I just picture it as being the throngs and people of Israel. But doing a more careful reading where God is telling Moshe to go speak to the Zikanim, to the elders, it seems like it's the elders who are not going to believe him and not listen to his voice, because that's what
exactly
God just said.
Yeah. Right. So even though God said, like, and they're going to listen to you, these elders, Moshe's like, no, they're not. I don't think they are.
It's a direct contradiction.
Yeah, the God said, like, they're going to listen to you. Moses is like, I don't know. I have experience with these guys. They are not going to listen to me.
Right.
They're going to say, Lo nireh lecha Hashem. Now, the interesting question is, what exactly is Moses' fear? There's two ways of reading it. One way of reading it, the way I'd always read it for many, many years, is they're going to believe that God never showed up, right? Mm-hmm. That you're a liar, that you're a false prophet, that you're just making up stuff, that you're some sort of self-aggrandizing Messiah who thinks you had some sort of theological epiphany, but it's not true. Now, that's a possibility. The problem with that possibility is God's answer, God's response to this, because God says, oh, you know what? I'm going to give you some signs. And those signs are going to convince everybody that I showed up and talked to you. And Emu, I would just tell you, like, if you were a wizened elder, you've been around for 73 years or so, you have some political standing, you're the vice chair of the city council of Ramses, and somebody comes up and says, the Lord has appeared to me, right? And you say, yeah, right. And they say, no, I can prove it to you. Watch, right? And the next thing they do is they take some water out and it turns red when it hits the ground. You look a little skeptical. And they say, no, wait. See this staff? Smash. Staff hits the ground, turns into a serpent. You roll your eyes a little bit. It's like, no, wait. I can do more. You take your hand and you put it on your shirt. You take out your hand and it's white. And it's like, okay, would you be convinced? Like, now for sure, the Almighty has come and you just have to go along with this guy. What would you say?
Yeah, maybe I would give it a step above cheap parlor tricks, right? Like, they're fancy and they're cool, but I feel like in an age of where people believe in magic, like, you're a magician. You're not, like, it doesn't prove to me that God spoke to you. And if you wanted to prove that God spoke to you, right? Like, can you give me something with a little bit more power, a little more creativity, right?
I mean, it's God. Bigger. God can do anything. Like, God has great plagues. God could just give him a plague to do, like that could affect the entire country. Like, that would be impressive. These are singularly non-impressive things for God. They're the kinds of things which, if you saw these tricks done by a skilled magician on 34th Street in Manhattan, right, you would literally keep on walking, right?
You just give me a picture of, like, Moshe saying, can I get a volunteer from the audience? And he has a lady laid down in a box. He cuts her in two and he says, God has appeared to me.
That's right, exactly. So I want to suggest that Moses's skepticism was not that people wouldn't believe that God showed up. They wouldn't believe that the kind of God I'm talking about has shown up. Remember, the theory that we're developing here is that this story, the burning bush, just happens to be the story in which God's name, Yud-He and Vav-He, the being with you kind of God, is actually being revealed. This is like this new name, and God is saying, like, this is my identity. I am empathetic. I am there for you. And Moshe says, you know what? I don't think the elders are going to buy the idea that you're that kind of God, that kind of God has revealed themselves to you, like a caring, loving, personal God who's been there the whole time, right? That's very hard for me to believe, that the God who is at once the God of everything is also the God for little old me and really cares. And plus, like, I mean, we've been in terrible pain here for many years. Where was he yesterday? Where was he the day before? It's a hard pill to swallow. And Moshe is like, you know what? I don't think they're going to believe in an empathetic God. I think that an empathetic God who is supreme, I'm not so sure about that. And God then says, well, I want to actually prove it to you. And we have a course on Aleph Beta, the 3 great lies of the Exodus, where we go through these signs. And the signs, we argued in that course, each of these 3 signs are designed for God to really make an argument that I've actually seen the suffering of the people, right? If you got water that turns to blood, so what in the people's lived experiences reminds you of water that when it hits the ground, all of a sudden it's not water anymore, it's blood?
It reminds you of the worst crime that the Egyptians ever perpetrated on the Israelites, which wasn't backbreaking slavery. It was taking their babies and throwing them in the Nile. And the reason you throw babies into a Nile is because what does the Nile look like when you throw children into it? It looks unchanged, right? The Nile doesn't bear the crime. It wipes away the crime and washes away all wrongdoing. So the profundity of revealing what this river is really covering up, saying this river isn't just water, it's blood, and it's the blood of your children. And I see that. which I think has a really important effect on the victims to say, I see what was done to you.
Exactly. Each of these three signs is designed to show that God sees a terrible crime that was foisted upon the people by the Egyptians, which the people know, but it looks like is just a cover up that the Egyptians have made. And right, one cover up is the Nile. The Nile covers all sins. And God is like, no, it doesn't. I know that it's blood. The other cover up is the leprous hand, right? Later on, the idea of leprosy is associated with the way a stillborn looks. And Pharaoh said, have the midwives kill the children and lie to the mothers that, oh no, it was just a stillborn. And that there would be this genocide that was carried out this way. So each of the three signs has some sort of lie that's covering up. And it's God's way of saying to the elders, I get it. I understand what it is that you've been through. I am the empathy God. I totally get it. And so this is this common theme that goes through the burning bush story over and over again, which is that God is like really serious about making a point. And that point has to do with who God really is. That God is this empathetic God who really gets it, who's heard the cries of the people. That's a major theme of the burning bush.
So it sounds like you're suggesting like a major paradigm shift in the burning bush, and it answers a lot of like questions that a person might have about this story, because I think like the pre-paradigm view of looking at things is the people are in trouble. God is their powerful superhero who's going to save them. But you've got a million questions if that's the paradigm, because if you're in the power paradigm, then God doesn't need Moshe at all. Right. But God actually is involving a human, and that human has to deliver a message to Pharaoh. And right, God is interested in Pharaoh understanding something, in Egypt understanding something. But there's also these elders, and the elders are supposed to understand something. And what they're supposed to understand, God wants to make sure that everybody knows what kind of God he is, and that he is a God who listens. Right.
God is like, no, I'm listening. And that seems really important for God to convey over here.
With that, we are finally ready to leave the burning bush behind, but not the Exodus narrative itself. You see, Rabbi Fohrman now wanted to take us forward and see how this would all actually play out. Did Moshe understand God's message of the being with you God? Would he successfully convey that to the elders? How would he bring that to Pharaoh? Having focused in so closely on the intent and details of this mission, we were primed to critically examine how the story would actually unfold.
So let's pick up after the burning bush. Here we are. Moses is on his way back. He meets up with Aaron, and now they're going through what it was that God told him to do. So let's just make sure that everything is going according to plan. Let's go to verse 28. Vayagid Moshe la'Aaron et kol divrei Hashem. Moses tells Aaron everything that God had told him at the burning bush, everything that this Yud Kei Vav Kei, this being with you God, had said. Asher shlachov et kol ha'otot asher tzivot. He showed Aaron all the signs. And vayelech Moshe ba'Aaron, and Moses and Aaron went. Vayaslu et kol ziknei Yisrael, and they gathered all the elders of Israel. And Ema, were they supposed to do that? Were they supposed to gather the elders?
They were supposed to gather the elders for sure.
Yep, they were. So everything's going great. And let's see what happens next. Read the next verse, verse 30.
Vaydaber Aaron et kol hadvarim asher diber Adonai al Moshe vayas haotot le'enei ha'am. So Aaron does all the things that God had spoken to Moshe to do, but here's where there's a change. The change is that he performs the signs in the eyes, not of the elders, but of the entire people. And then Vayamein ha'am is 31, that the people believe. And that's strange to me because it seemed pretty clear that God was interested in the elders believing.
And that leads to a where's Waldo question, which is like, we gathered together all the elders, and now what happened to the elders? It's like the audience for Aaron's great three signs trick is the people. Yeah, and it's like, what about the elders? Well, the people are there. Like, yeah, the people believe. Like Yishmu, and they hear Kipakad Hashem b'nei Yisrael, that God has redeemed them. Tirat and Yam, they believe that God has seen their suffering. They get that there's an empathetic God. Vayitu vayishtachavu, and everyone bows, and it's very dramatic. But you notice it wasn't exactly what God said. no elders. And now the next thing that was supposed to happen, Emu, was who's supposed to go to Pharaoh,
The
right?
elders are
Remember?
supposed to accompany. Yeah, it was a contingent of 72 people showing
That's
up
right.
in the throne room.
So read the next verse. Who goes to Pharaoh?
V'achar ba'u Moshe ve'Aharon. Moses and Aaron, no elders. Vayomru el Paro, and they speak to Pharaoh.
So it doesn't sound like what God said to do with the burning bush is getting followed. The elders have dropped off.
And I'll just point this out because I think if I were reading this again pre-Rabbi Fohrman, I would have read about those elders and I would have seen them as a stand-in for all of Israel, and that's how I would have reconciled the beginning of the chapter and the end of the chapter, and just said, okay, elders, and then Israel. But it's inelegant, right? Like the editor, God's angelic editor, should have just cut out the elders the first time and said, look, do the signs for the people, and then the people will believe, because that's what ends up happening at the end of the chapter. The second thing, and the real kicker, is you can't get around the verse that says that the elders were supposed to accompany Moshe and Aaron to Pharaoh,
Yep.
right? They seem to have to accompany Moshe and Aaron to Pharaoh's palace. So this double disappearance of the elders seems really conspicuous. Like, okay, they're gone when Moshe and Aaron are supposed to do the signs, and then they're especially gone for their most major role that was just talked about in the last chapter, which is to confront Pharaoh. That is interesting.
Yeah, and now what we have to ask ourselves is, are there any consequences for that? In a way, this picks up on some themes from my book, The Exodus You Almost Passed Over, but it takes them considerably farther. In The Exodus You Almost Passed Over, I suggested there were different possible versions of the Exodus. Like God had an ideal version of the Exodus. And it might actually be that the Exodus as it happened was not that ideal version because humans, caused some things to change, caused them to be a less idealized form of the Exodus. But here there's a whole other dimension to it, which frankly I hadn't noticed when I wrote that book, which is like all the way back in chapter 5 is the beginning of things changing from the way God wanted it, the lack of elders. And I might say, like, these elders, who really cares about them? Why were they such a big deal? But let's read chapter 5, see what happens next. So Moses comes with Aaron, and what do they say? Emu, can you read Moses' speech to Pharaoh?
I can. Vayomru el Paro. Moshe and Aaron say to Pharaoh, Ko Amar Adonai, thus spake Yud Ke Vav Ke Elohei Yisrael, the God of Israel, Shalach et Ami, send out my nation, Vayachoguli Bamidbar, and they will make a celebration for me in the desert.
Good. And that's, pretty close to that let my people go business, right? Shalach, let my people go. But was that what Moses was supposed to say when he and the elders were supposed to go to Pharaoh? Was he supposed to say, Ko Amar Hashem, thus says God, send out my people, v'achoguli b'midbar, let they celebrate before me in the desert? Let's try to break that down. What strikes you as what he was supposed to say, and what strikes you as new?
So this is really interesting to me because you're basically saying it's not just the elders that change, something else changes too. And if I have to think about that, and I remember what God first says to Moshe, I do remember this idea of a celebration in the desert like that.
Yep.
That was a thing that God says.
That was.
But I think if you compare the speeches, God does not say it to tell Pharaoh in his opening, statement to Pharaoh to let my people go. That was not the original speech.
There was never this demand. Let's actually go back to the text, chapter 3, verse 18.
God says that you'll take the Zaken of the elders with you. You're going to go to the king of Egypt, and you shall say to him, Adonai Elohei ha'ivrim nikra aleinu. God, the God of the Hebrews, has happened upon us. It's not that he called out to us, it's nikra with a hey. It's like this God chanced upon us. And now he doesn't command Pharaoh. He doesn't say, send us. He says, please, if you will, right? No. He's asking permission. Please, Pharaoh, let us go a journey of 3 days to the desert. And we can make sacrifices. We can make offerings to our God.
Now, Emu, the way God phrased it there, was God actually directly addressing Pharaoh? Was God making a demand of Pharaoh?
No, God is asking him to ask permission.
It's not even God asking permission. Let's just take it apart slowly. God is saying, say to them two things. Thing A is, Hashem Elokeinu Nikra Aleinu. God chanced upon us. What did God say? We're not telling you what God says. We're just saying we had a transcendental encounter with God. Va'ata, and now God is saying, I want you to ask in your names, you and the elders. We have a request of you, Pharaoh. Not God. We, the elders of Israel, together with Moshe, are requesting, Nelchana, could we please go for 3 days? We would like to celebrate with this God. We would like to offer offerings. Mizbecha usually is shlamim offerings that are associated with a brit, with a covenant. We'd like to enter into some sort of relationship with this God of ours, right? And what struck me, Emu, as I was rereading this, is how in sync this was with the notion of a being with you, God, right?
It's definitely not a power God.
It's definitely not power. There's no power at all here. Being with you, God, showed up. And it's almost like the people are so entranced with that notion of a being with you, God, who they felt actually understood what they were going through. And that encounter was so powerful that the elders on their own are asking something of Pharaoh. We'd like to maybe try to have a little bit of a relationship with this God. We'd like to go for 3 days. Could you please just let us go? It would be so meaningful for us to connect with this God who cared about us.
You're picking up on the absence of God commanding his people to even make a celebration for him, right? And what that would show is a different kind of worship of the divine, right? A kind of worship where a being God appears and you, out of your own free will, out of your own volition, say, I want to be with this being God.
Yes.
And what I'm seeing, and this may be heady, is such a purity of ends and means. And what I mean by that is, if the beer God is trying to communicate to everybody, to Moshe, to the people, to Egypt, that is the true nature of God, that he is loving, compassionate, and a beer, then the means matter. So he's actually not even going to command anything, right? I'm the beer God. I'm going to use no violence at all. And what I do is I happen upon people and they choose to celebrate me. I don't even command them to come and celebrate me. That, I think, is theologically revolutionary, but also not particularly threatening at the same time.
Yeah, right? And this isn't what Moses actually says to Pharaoh. And I wonder, it's like one of the things we can play out is this sort of what if game, and we'll never really know the answer. But like, what if Moses had said this to Pharaoh? Let's look at what Moses actually says to Pharaoh. So Moses comes without the elders, and he does talk about a celebration of God in the desert, but some things are different. You will read it again. Let's go back to the beginning of chapter 5. Go ahead.
Ko Amar Adonai, thus spake Adonai, Elohei Israel, the God of the Israelites. Shalach et ami, send forth my people, v'yachogu li b'midbar, and they will celebrate for me in the desert.
Okay, what's different?
First of all, they're quoting God as if God actually is speaking to Pharaoh.
That's right.
The original speech is not, Pharaoh is not the subject of a prophecy. It's actually just like they're supposed to talk to Pharaoh about their own prophecy, about something
of
that
their
happened
own
to
volition. Yeah. But just Pharaoh, we want to tell you something that happened to us and how we'd like to respond. Right.
And that's massive because, I mean, I don't know, this challenges Pharaoh quite a bit already. That right, there's a higher power.
Listen to the voice. Shalah. What grammatical form is that of a verb in Hebrew?
It's a tzivui, it's a command.
That's a command. Who are you coming off commanding, Pharaoh? First thing you say to Pharaoh, command? Right? God is commanding him? Like, whoa, right?
Especially because this would be contrasted with Nelchana, with
please, could we go?
Please.
Right, please, right. Your loyal servants are asking us, please, could we go? That's what God said to do. But no, instead, the being God of Israel has shown up, right? He has a message for you. Thus says the being God of Israel, Shalach et ami, a command, send forth my people, right? And let them celebrate me in the desert. Right? God is demanding a celebration in the desert. It's like you can imagine God up in heavens is like, oh man, like I wasn't demanding that you guys celebrate before me. I just thought like maybe you'd be inspired to celebrate before me, and maybe you could convey that to Pharaoh. Entirely different tone. And
Yeah.
if you're Pharaoh, how do you feel getting addressed this way?
I feel attacked. I feel provoked, and somebody's questioning my authority. And so there's a challenge right now. Will I bend my neck, or will I reestablish my authority?
Yeah, Pharaoh's going to be a little prickly, and Pharaoh is very prickly. Read verse 2 for us.
Vayomer Paro, mi Adonai asher eshma bekolo. Who is Yud Ke Vav Ke that I should listen to his voice? Lishalach et Israel, to send Israel. Lo yadati et Adonai. I've never heard of him. V'gam et Israel lo ashaleach. And Israel I will also not send.
Pharaoh is like, I don't know of any God like the being with you, God, and I'm not sending out Israel anyway. It's almost like Moses garbled the message somehow. And, he comes back a second time, and then aspects of the original message come through in the second speech, but the sheen is already off the ball at this point. And even this speech is not really what God said. Give us speech number 2 of Moses.
Elohei ha'ivrim nikra aleinu. All right, let me back up. Moshe seems to say, the God of the Hebrews, nikra aleinu, he called out to us. And nil chanad derech shloshet yamim midbar. Let us please go. He's asking for permission for 3 days into the desert. V'nizbachal Adonai Eloheinu, and let us give offerings to Yud Ke Vav Ke, our God. Now, if Moshe ended here, that might be good, but he doesn't.
Pretty good, right? Because there was that request to go for 3 days. That part was good. Offer offerings to God. That's what God said.
Some permission is good.
But then Moses adds a line at the end. Why, Pharaoh, should you accede to this request? What does he say?
He says to Pharaoh, look, you really, please just let us go and sacrifice to our God. Because if you don't, he might kill us, either with the plague or with the sword. Right? Which is just shocking. Like that does not show up in
right now. Maybe you would expect something like that from one of Pharaoh's polytheistic gods, right? But from the being with you God, the God of love, who understands the pain of the Israelites, who just wants to inspire this outpouring of wanting to connect with us, like it wasn't what God said. So neither speech quite, it's both speeches of Moses, when you put them together, have the elements of the original speech, but both of them are very, very different. The first is this command trying to compel Pharaoh. The second is this, it represents God as this vengeful kind of God that would be slighted if the people didn't go out and would probably kill the people. Right?
Wait, I'm worried that our listeners might have a hard time listening to this, because it's very uncomfortable to suggest that Moshe floundered the speech. And I just want to point out that all Rabbi Fohrman is doing is noticing differences in Exodus 3 and 4 as to what God commands Moshe to do versus what happens in Exodus 5, what actually happens. We'll put this together and we'll come up with our theory. But the key is to contend with the fact that there are changes, and the text expects you to notice these changes and to relate to them. As frustrating or difficult as it is to kind of get the rug pulled out from under you on the Exodus you always pictured in your mind.
Emu, just to respond, if you go back to the burning bush, God does say some of this language, which Moses ends up quoting. It just sounds like Moses actually used it before its time. You see, there's this moment where God says, by the way, you should just know it's going to come to a climactic showdown between me and Pharaoh. It's ultimately going to come to me killing his firstborn. At the very end of the burning bush, God says to Moses, when Pharaoh says no, ultimately you're going to have to say to him, Ko Amar Hashem, thus says God, this is my child Israel, and I'm telling you, Shalachet b'ni, send out my child, and if you don't send him out, I'm going to kill your firstborn. That's the language you use at the very end. Moses somehow, in almost this confusion, takes the last thing God said to him, which was about the last thing you're supposed to ever tell Pharaoh at the end of the 10th plague, and uses it as the first thing, he says to Pharaoh. When you're
Wow.
supposed to be talking about this being their God, nice and gentle, Moses uses this very forceful, Ko Amar Hashem, thus says God, Shalach et bani, send out my child. He advances that language from the 10th plague to the beginning, and Pharaoh's like, whoa, that was fast. And all of a sudden, Pharaoh is incensed.
What you're pointing out, I think, is remarkable because
when God tells Moshe, hey, tell Pharaoh about this firstborn thing, that's like after the burning bush. It's after Moshe goes back home, hangs out with his father-in-law, saddles up the donkey. It's just like right before he's heading out, God tells him, like almost like he presents him with this glass case. And he's, break glass in case of emergency.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
if things don't go well, then you can tell him this one last thing. But it's really separate from the energies of everything else at the burning bush. But the other thing that I noticed once you're putting our attention on this speech is still the energy of violence, right? That God is suggesting to Moshe that you use at the end. Even that energy comes from an energy of compassion and an energy of a Yud Kei Vav Kei God, because what he says to him, this is in verse 22, is Ko Amar Hashem. Gus says Yud Kei Vav Kei, B'ni B'chor Yisrael. Pharaoh, you got to know something about my people, Israel. They're
Mhm.
like my kid. They're my firstborn son. And here is where it's like Liam Neeson in the movie Taken, right? Like if you hold my son
Yeah.
hostage, Anochi horeget bincha bechorecha, right? And here is where compassion can become violent, right?
Yeah.
Which is if you're gonna hurt my kid, then the ultimate father in me is activated, and I will have to resort to violence. So even that
And there's
is,
nothing I won't do. And I'll break every rule. And if you think about it, God does. One of the rules of being God is you don't do miracles all the time. If you do miracles all the time, nothing left of the laws of nature. God says, I don't care. My kid's in trouble. I'm coming after you. Just think of any movie. You mentioned Liam Neeson Taken. It's like, what, as a father, what wouldn't you do for your kid? What rule wouldn't you break for your kid? Because that's what a father does to save their kid against the aggressor. And don't push me, what God is saying. But you're right, even that is coming from the being their God, but it's the violence that emerges organically from what it means to really be with your child.
yeah. And in that sense, like it does seem surprising for Moshe to break that glass, which in case of emergency, right at the very beginning, because there does seem to be a lot of laying the groundwork that God wants Moshe to do before we ever get to this point.
Yeah. Let's read a little bit more. How does Pharaoh respond to this, very abrasive demand that he thinks God is making of him? This command to let the Jews go and celebrate before their God. Give me Pharaoh's response.
Vayomer Alehem Melech Mitzrayim. This is verse 4 in chapter 5. The king of Egypt says to them, Lama Moshe ve'Aaron tafriu et ha'am mima'asav. To what end are Moshe and Aaron preventing or bothering the people from their good work? Go unto your burdens. You've got work to do. Vayomer Paro, and Pharaoh continues to say, Hein Rabbi Mata Am Haaretz. People of the land, there's a lot of them. They have important GDP work to do. You've caused them to rest of their burdens. This is a big problem for us. And Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters, the et shotrav, and the officers, saying, Lo tosifun latet teven la'am, milbon halvenim kitmol shel. We should not continue to give straw to the people in order to make their bricks, just like we've done yesterday and the day before. Hem yelchu v'koshushu lahem teven. They should be the ones to go and get their straw. And this is the quota of the bricks should not be any less. They need to continue to make the same amount of bricks. Kinir pimheim, because ultimately these people, they're clearly lazy. Al kainheim so akim lemor. That's the reason why they scream, saying Nelcha nizbacha lelohenu. Let's go worship our God. So what we should do is just make their workload heavier, and then al yishu b'divrei shaker. They're not going to turn to false matters. So things had really escalated between Moshe and Pharaoh, and the results were pretty disastrous for the people. And that just begs the question. If it's at all possible that this could have been prevented based on Moshe's presentation to Pharaoh, why did Moshe seemingly go off script? Why didn't he just say what God told him to say and in the order that God told him to say it? And personally, I think it would be kind of lame if the punchline to this story is, when God gives you instructions and reveals himself to you, make sure you take better notes and say things in the proper order. That's what we learn from this story. I mean, that just can't be it. There must be something deeper going on that would have led Moshe to stray from the script in this way. And Rabbi Fohrman suspected that it actually came back to our missing mystery men, those elders that Moshe was supposed to take with him when he went to speak to Pharaoh in the first place.
I think we're on the cusp of being able to see, like, what would the Zakanim have done? I think the Zakanim would have actually done two things. One practical thing, right? One doing thing, and one being there thing in concert with the being with you, God. The practical thing is this. Listen to the way Pharaoh dismisses Moses, right? Moses, Hein Rabim ata ama aretz. I got a lot of slaves here. Lama motivaram tafriyutam. How come you guys are disturbing the people? Let them go about their business. Let them go about their work. They're perfectly fine working. You're making them take time off. Time is money. And you know what? If they have time to go screaming, they got too much time on their hands. They should just be working harder. That's what I think. Right? Pharaoh is very dismissive. Imagine that the Zakanim had been there. If the Zakanim had been there, how might this have gone differently? What would the Zakanim have added, right? Just in terms of strengthening Moses' argument, that Moses is in a much weaker position because the Zakanim aren't around.
Well, Pharaoh's left to imagine the people's motivations because the people aren't there. And he imagines the worst about their motivations. It seems like he hears them screaming, but he interprets that cynically. And what's fascinating that I just noticed is that the encounter ends there. Like Moshe doesn't respond, Aaron doesn't respond, and most of all, the Zakanim don't respond because they're not there, right? The speech ends, and this is the proclamation before Pharaoh. Everyone's left stunned with what Pharaoh has just decreed. So the Zakanim aren't there to at least represent what the people would have to say.
And if the Zakanim had been there, if they had said, like, look, we, the representative of your people, are coming with Moses, and we want to let you know we've had this strange encounter with this being with you, God, and we just want to go in the desert for 3 days and connect with them. At the very least, Pharaoh would have been unable to say that, Moses, you're isolated. Everyone's against you. I'm against you. And even the people are fine working. Why are you disturbing the people? They're perfectly fine working. No, that's not true. The people, through their representatives, are coming and saying, we, in solidarity with Moses, are telling you we'd like a few days off. So maybe Pharaoh would say no, but he couldn't say no like this. He couldn't say no in this incensed kind of way. He's not being commanded. His authority is not being challenged. His slaves have a request, right? And he can't say that it's not something the slaves don't want. So he could say, sorry, you guys are workers. I'm denying your request, right? But the anger that comes with being commanded to let them go, being able to isolate Moses and say, Moses, you're off here. You do not represent the people. The people are perfectly fine working, and you're this one crazy guy who thinks they should have 3 days off. I don't know anybody by the name of God, this craziness that you're talking about. He would not be in a position to say that because there's a consolidated force along with him. Moses would have had the power of community behind him, and he doesn't have that power. Stripped of this Canaan, he goes into Pharaoh alone. And confronting Pharaoh alone, Moses searching for power without having this Canaan, where does he find it? In a subtle misrepresentation of the being with you, God. Pharaoh, you have no idea how much power this God has. He's commanding you to let the people go, right? That's what he tries to do, almost to impute power to this God. And yes, God does have power, but that wasn't quite the message. And it goes disastrously wrong. Pharaoh bristles at the idea that someone's going to boss him around, isolates Moses, and says, you're the crazy guy over here. I'm going to double the workload. And the people, as you say, are stunned. And there's nothing they can do. And the Israelite officers, they protest. and Pharaoh doesn't care and just calls them lazy. And in desperation, the Israelite officers come to Moses in verse 20 of chapter 5, by Yifku at Moshe bet Aaron, Nitzavim likratam b'tzeitam me'et Paro. They come and they encounter Moses and they say, Yireh aleichem Hashem aleichem v'yishpot. This being with you, God, he should judge between you and us. You've done nothing good for us. You made us stink in the eyes of Pharaoh. You've done nothing but give it a sword in their hands to kill us. And Moses doesn't even know what to say to them. He goes back to God and says, Lama harayota lama zed. God, why'd you do such a terrible thing to the people? Moses has the sense of being all alone, being left out to dry. It's like, God, you left me there in front of Pharaoh, and he just isolated me and called me crazy. And what was that for? It just made things worse. Lama harayota lama zed. Why'd you make things so bad for this people? Lama zed shlachtani. Why'd you send me? You made it so much worse than before I ever came to Pharaoh. They have to double their workload, and now they're crazy with work that they can't even do. But you didn't go saving the people, right? Literally the train has come off the wheels to such an extent that Moses is despondent. Moses feels all alone. But it wasn't just that the elders were going to do something. We're going to lend greater political power to Moses, although that is true. There's something else that the elders are doing also. They're helping Moses in a way in which it's not like a means to an end. It's not like we're going to be with you so that you're in a better position in front of Pharaoh, so that you can effectively show him that you have the people on your side. Being with is just an end in and of itself. It's lonely to lead. And God never wanted Moses leading lonely. You pointed out to me, it blew me away when you pointed this out to me. But it turns out there was another time that Moses was all alone. And there was another time that God found a solution for him. And fascinatingly, the solution then, years later, was the Canaan too.
Yeah, it's in Numbers 11. Moshe's dealing with complaints in the desert. And he gets fed up. The people are sick of the mun. They want meat. And Moshe feels all alone. And he turns to God and says, like, I can't handle this. And God says, don't worry. I'm going to, and he says, gather. Same thing is gather for yourselves 70 Zikanim. And I'm going to take some of the spirit of yours and put it on the people. And they're going to prophesy together with you. And those elders somehow are the antidote to Moshe's sense of loneliness.
And what's interesting, Emo, about those elders is that they're not actually doing anything. They're not called upon to judge. God just says they're going to have some of the spirit which you have, and they're going to be your partners in leading this people. And it's like if Moses would have said, yeah, but what are they doing? God would have said, well, they're not really doing anything. They're being with you. You just need somebody to be with you. You need the support of a community. And here too, at the burning bush, that was the point of this Canaan. The same way that God said, I want to be with you. And you don't have to worry about going to Pharaoh. It's like you're going to have elders with you and you don't have to worry about being with Pharaoh. Just that, the power of being with from God and from people is what the being with you God wants you to have. And once Moses doesn't have that and feels stripped of human accompaniment, it's almost like his grasp on what it is to be with the being with you, God, is also tenuous. And Moses reaches for something other than the extreme power of just being with you. Instead of having the confidence to just deliver God's speech, which is, hey, the being with you, God, it was so overwhelmingly meaningful for the people to have that encounter with that God. They just want to go out in the desert and offer offerings to him and connect with him. Instead of delivering that message to Pharaoh, even if it would have been rejected, Moses defaults to something more obvious about God, but not what God wanted Moses to deliver yet. And that was God's power. Yes, God had revealed his power to Moses. God had said it would ultimately come to his power, but that wasn't how you're supposed to open to Pharaoh. And somehow Moses defaults and uses language from the climactic battle that is to come at the
Mm.
end, and uses the more obvious parts of what you would assume a master of the universe would have, which is signs and wonders and power. That here's this God who demands from his people, and otherwise he's going to kill him, and demands from Pharaoh, and otherwise he's going to kill him. And God, in his wisdom, was like, no, that wasn't how we were going to do it. And if
Hmm.
you do it that way, it actually makes things worse.
That's really interesting. Like what I'm seeing is that the Zakanim were not utilitarian. They weren't supposed to do anything for Pharaoh, but that they, together with Moshe, were simply supposed to be with one another. And in that moment, Moshe's speeches were not supposed to be utilitarian. They weren't supposed to try to use power to force anything. They were just trying to explain to Pharaoh this new way of life that they've seen, where the values are different. The values aren't about power. They're not about force. They're not about control. They're simply about this concept of being and love and compassion. Um, and Moshe needed to experience that in order to convince anybody of that. And because he hadn't experienced that, perhaps he couldn't.
Well, he experienced part of it, right? But it speaks to, I think, the need for connection, right, to God, and that being mirrored in connection to people, right? God had said, look, I'm with you, right? But you can't touch God and you can't feel God. And God was saying, like, and I also want to give you some people that you can touch and feel who are going to be with you. Moses, you are with those who care about you and who are on your side. And it's this Canaan and it's me. And we're all behind you. And now go to Pharaoh and tell him about the experience of being there with a being with you, God.
But ultimately, Moshe doesn't bring the Zkanim with him. He doesn't deliver the nuanced message he was supposed to give to Pharaoh about a being with you kind of God. And because of that, Pharaoh responds very negatively and makes things much worse for the people. Moshe does seem to feel despondent and alone. And then he turns back to God.
So here is Moses. He comes complaining to God and says, look, God, it's all fallen apart. You've just made matters worse. Moses just feels so alone and just completely left out to dry. And, as we've seen, there was a plan that Moses and Aaron didn't quite adhere to, saying, I told you so. God says something else. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Moses, if it's power that you want, if it is me coming along to be the superhero to save my people, trust me, I have that ability. And you're about to see it. Ata tira asher esel para. You're about to see what I'm going to do to Pharaoh. Ki biyad chazaka yishal kain. Trust me, with a strong hand, he's going to send them out. Biyad chazaka yifashema. So with a strong hand, he's going to force them out of the land. But by Yidaber Elokim al Moshe, I need to tell you this. Vayomer Elav, Ani Hashem, I am the being with you, God.
Wow.
Never forget that. Right?
Well, what's striking to me in
Yeah.
that verse is it begins, Elohim says to Moshe, I am
Yes.
Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, which is, it fits perfectly with what you just said, which is that like Moshe's he's judging God and saying, you did evil. And God is like, don't worry, I'm going to be powerful. And my powerful name is talking to you. Like Elohim is telling Moshe, but after all of it, Moshe, just, you need to know something about me. I'm not Elohim. I'm Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, or I'm not only Elohim, I'm Yud-Keh Vav-Keh.
Right. And as we say in Shema Yisrael, Yud Keh Vav Keh Elokeinu, Yud Keh Vav Keh Echad, that ultimately the deepest facet of God is Yud Hey and Vav Hey, this God who's compassionate, the God who is the being with you, God. And God's power emerges from that. And God is saying, well, you have to understand, this really is who I am. And in a way, without sort of hitting Moshe over the head with it, he seemed to be implying, you didn't quite represent me that way to Pharaoh. You represented me as this all-powerful master of the universe. It's not like I don't have power, but at its core, I'm the being with you, God. That's what I was trying to tell you before at the burning bush. And, I understand. I revealed myself in history to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all your forefathers as this powerful God, this God whose power knows no bounds, Ushmi Hashem. And that aspect of me, of the being with you, God, lo nodati lahem, I didn't make it known to them. I realize I never made known, really, that I'm the being with you, God. But that's who I am. And the being with you, God, is going to stand by the covenant that I made with them. That's the next verse 4, and verse 5, and the being with you, God, hears. Gamani shamati et nakat b'nei Yisrael. I've heard the suffering of my people, and therefore go tell Israel. You have to at least make sure that Israel understands this, if not Pharaoh. Ani Hashem, I am the being with you, God. Let them know this truth. Because I care so much, because I've heard their cries, I'm going to act on that, because that's what empathy does. When you feel something strongly, when you're really with someone in their suffering, you can't help but act. And when an all-powerful God can't help but act, boy, you're going to see what happens. I'm going to take you out from your suffering. I'm going to save you. I'm going to redeem you with a strong hand. I'm going to take you as my people. I'll be your God, and you will know, just like I have known your suffering, you'll know something about me, that I am the being with you, God, who will take you out from under the burdens of Egypt and bring you into the land that I promised you. Ani Hashem, I am the being with you, God. The only thing is that the people are not in the place that they can hear this yet. And Moshe comes to the people, v'lo shamu al Moshe, and they don't listen to him. Why? Mikotze ruach v'mavadah kasha, from the shortness of breath and from their backbreaking work. Remember, as difficult as their work as before, what changed? As a result of the sort of disastrous encounter with Pharaoh, the people are now doing double the work and having to come up with the same quota of bricks, but having to come up with their own straw. They are simply so completely puzzled with all the work that they got to do that they can't even hear anything. They have literally the shortness of breath. They're just panting. And so they have no space in their head for a being with you, God. Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe, and so the being with you, God, said to Moshe, Bo daber al Paro melech Mitzrayim, go now to Pharaoh, and vishalach et bnei Yisrael martzo, and you've got to start the process of getting him to send out Israel from his land. And Moses, despondent, comes before God and says, Hein bnei Yisrael lo shamu elai. I tried to tell the people about the being with you, God, and they're not listening to me. Eich yishmeini Paro. How do you think Pharaoh is going to listen to me? No one's going to listen to me. The whole thing is going to be a disaster. Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe, but God, the being with you, God, spoke to Moses and Aaron, Vayitzavim el bnei Yisrael, and commanded them to go back to the people of Israel, and commanded them to go to the king of Egypt to bring the people out of it. But the problem is now they're doing it without the people knowing something and without Pharaoh knowing something. The people don't really understand who God's identity is. And Pharaoh doesn't really understand who God's identity is.
One of my favorite parts, actually, you didn't read, but is the very end of chapter 6, which is, you hear about this speech that God gives to Moshe even after he seems to be just so frustrated. And in chapter 6, verse 14, it says, Ele Roshei Beit Avotam. It starts to tell you about the heads of the houses.
These were the elders.
Right. It almost feels like here are the missing elders, but then the whole genealogy concludes with, and by the way, the people who spoke to Pharaoh in verse 27 were Moshe and Aaron. Right. So it's like the text goes out of its way to tell you, hey, there was a role for these
were the
elders.
elders who were supposed to accompany, and then goes and lists all the people, which, by the way, is crazy because, do we really need this genealogy advertisement at the end of chapter 6? Like, nobody wants this. It's like the credits at the end of the movie. Nobody sticks around for the credits at the end of the movie. But the answer is, it's not. These are the missing elders. It's pointing out to you, these were the folks who were supposed to be with Moses. And in the end, who Aaron and Moshe Haim Hamadabrim El Baro, verse 26 and 27. In the end, it was only Moses and Aaron that came and spoke to Pharaoh to bring the people out of Israel. Who Moshe and Aaron? It was just Moses and Aaron. Vayihi biyom diber Hashem al Moshe beretz Mitzrayim. And on the day that God spoke to Moses in Egypt, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor ani Hashem. And when God said to Moses and said, I am the being with you, God, daber al Paro melech Mitzrayim, go say to Pharaoh everything that I told you. Well, he didn't say it with the elders. He just said it himself. The end. Moshe said before Yud Hey and Vav Hey, the being with you, God, I don't think I can do it. How's Pharaoh supposed to listen? The people aren't even listening. Nobody believes this truth. The main point is no one knows about the being with you, God. And in the end, there is a stressed out people and an all alone Moses who just feels like there's no case that he can make for this being with you, God. And that's the way we go into the Exodus, with no one believing in the being with you, God, not Pharaoh, not the people. It's a secret that only Moses and Aaron and God know about. And how does that change the rest of the story? So when we come back, that's what we'll explore.
I hope and suspect that most of you out there are thinking what I'm thinking. Wow, what a powerful, though tragic, read of the burning bush and the first steps of the Exodus story. A read that opens up so much of what God really wanted to communicate about himself and how it seems to not have gone as planned. And it was all right there within the text. But I suspect that there are some of you out there who are also thinking, hold on, this can't be how the story ends. God must find a way to communicate who he is to the people. It can't end there. And wait a second, what happened to the shofar and Rosh Hashanah? That's why I'm listening to this podcast in the first place. Well, I hear you, dear listener, and I have great news. We have only one more episode to go in this season, and in it, Rabbi Fohrman is going to use all that we've learned about the Exodus in the last 2 episodes to pull everything together. We're going to see how these issues in the Exodus might just be redeemed at Sinai with its shofar. And we'll even finally jump to Yericho and its shofar blasts as well, just as promised. And then we're going to bring it all back to Rosh Hashanah, guaranteed. Let me tell you, this last leg of the journey is going to be a wild ride. You do not want to miss it. Before you go, just give me 90 more seconds of your time to share a message. A Book Like No Other is going to be 3 years old in January, and over that time, we've grown to a listener base of thousands of you join us on these learning journeys, and it means so much to us. You know, I started learning from Rabbi Fohrman at a time when I was committed to Torah, but also frustrated, trying to understand how to connect to this text. His way of learning opened that up for me, and if it does that for you, that's why we're here, that's why we exist. And that's why we're going to continue to offer this show entirely for free, even though we really shouldn't. Especially this season, Aleph Beta has a whole library of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur content behind a paywall, and it's kind of the worst business model for us to be giving this away, giving y'all that high holiday fix. We're competing with ourselves, but this podcast, it's just too good not to share. And we feel bad putting it behind a paywall, honestly. So please, if you like what we do, take the next step. Check out Aleph Beta and consider signing up for a membership. You're going to gain access to our entire library, plus bonus material and live events. It's a great way to show that this matters to you and that you want to be a part of our community. And it keeps us foolishly giving away the goods. Thanks for supporting us.